Okay, you're up.
Okay.
Okay, so does anybody here not know Bo Meier? Okay, Bo Meier, Ohio State graduate, perfusionist for many, many years, now works in industry, very big in the development of the Inspire dual reservoir that he's going to be talking about, and many other products that Soren LivaNova now has, and all around great guy. Just met him, and so far I like him. We'll see how it goes after this talk. Thank you very much.
You got it, Joe. Thank you.
One other fact about Bo is that he actually named that oxygen.
I was going to say that was my contribution to the family here and the development was I got to check for the name. But what I'm going to talk about today is biocompatibility. And I think most of us look at biocompatibility as circuit coatings. And, you probably don't think about it a whole lot beyond that. If I've got a tip-to-tip coated circuit, I'm good to go. And we pretty much rely on industry to improve on biocompatibility. If it doesn't happen from the industry side, it doesn't need to happen. But really, it's more of an interplay between perfusion technique and the tools that industry gives you to work with. This is a picture of the Inspire Dual. We think this is kind of like the gold standard of biocompatibility. But I'm going to go into where we are with this and why we think this way. Biocompatibility is a whole range of things: GME protection, coatings, perfusion technique. And when they developed the Inspire family a few years ago, they came up with a few different designs. The yellow chamber or the yellow lid device is a single chamber. You look at the membrane, it does not have the integrated filter. We're over here, the dual was the blue lid, does have the integrated filter option. And basically all these pieces are interchangeable. You kind of got to accommodate everybody's needs. It's like who moved my cheese. There's guys that want the easy stuff, other guys that are willing to be aggressive and get out there early. The development of that dual reservoir involved 9 new patents, different things that they brought into play that they felt like they needed to apply for patents. And let's look at this a little bit. Basically, you look at the lid of this reservoir and it looks pretty much like everything you're used to. You got 1/4-inch ports, you got a venous port. The unique thing is this little sequestration valve in the center. And what that does is it controls a dam. There is a wall that separates the Cardi Atomy from the venous section. And down here at the bottom of that, you can see there's some striations. And with the sequestration valve closed, you've got the ability to completely separate all your cardiotomy suction from the venous blood. You can lift that valve and it will then allow communication between the two chambers. Essentially, you've got a single chamber venous reservoir. And you can notice over here on the side of the sequestration valve is a 1/4-inch port. With the valve closed, you've got the ability to pull volume out of that cardiotomy section and run it over to your cell-saver device. But that's not the only thing they did, because when they developed this family, they wanted the biocompatibility to be part of every aspect of this oxygenator. I'm going to back up here a little bit. The membrane. Surface area is huge. I mean, when you think about how many times a red cell passes through the circuit, it's kind of like rolling a red cell down a couple football fields over the next 2 hours. It has that much surface activation. So the 6-liter, there's 2 oxygenators, a 6-liter and 8. The 6-liter, which pretty much covers about 90% of your patient population, has the smallest surface area of all the oxygenators that we're using today. It's got a plastic heat exchanger. The plastic heat exchanger is far more biocompatible than stainless steel. The other thing that is going on over here is we've got anti-foam agents. Not very good stuff to dump into the blood, but they're a necessary evil. So what they did was, when you separate the venous blood from the cardiotomy blood, you've got a sponge with antifoam C, which is the latest version of antifoam. It's a little more biocompatible than the other stuff. The only time the venous blood really ever comes into contact is if you've got a lot of air bubbling down the venous line, and the bubbles kind of bubble up within this venous filter and come in contact with it. It knocks them down, drops them right back into circulation. There's another thing they did. Vent blood is really clean blood, if you will. You know, it's not laying in the chest. You're pulling it right out of the aorta or right out of the ventricle. And so they moved vent ports right up front. You can kind of see it right here on the right next to the venous down tube. That gives you the ability to pull the vent blood right into the venous section. Of course, everything is filtered. Cardiotomy, the venous section, everything. I roughly call it 40 microns. So the vent tubes is, you know, if you're keeping your vent pump speed under control for an active vent, it doesn't become all that highly activated. It's perfect for people that are still using a gravity vent. Back in the cardiotomy section, it's rated for 4 liters. But it's not a depth filter. Everything is screened, so there's no holdup volume. So if you're using this as a single chamber, even on the yellow lid, there's very little holdup volume, so blood conservation, which is another thing that we need to think about as far as biocompatibility, is greatly improved because you've reduced the holdup volume. At 4 liters, which is what this thing's rated for, you know, you're talking about a holdup volume of about 50 cc's. It's less than 20 over here on the cardiotomies or on the reservoir side. But where did they come up with this? We know that cardiotomy suction is not bad, and that's not a new concept. We've been talking about that for a long time. It's got huge amounts of gaseous, lipids, solid emboli, activated white cells and platelets, fibrin split products, reduced heparin levels. How do we know that? Well, we've been looking at it for a long time. I'm going to look at some of the literature. Back in '77, Starr basically did a series of cases where he sequestered the cardiotomy suction in half his patients, left it go in others. And what he found out is that fibrin clot stability was greatly affected at the end of the case, and patients tended to bleed more that got cardiotomy suction. Kincaid in 2000 gave us a new term. He called it SCADS, small capillary arterial dilatations. And he did a neat study with dogs. And what they did was they did half the dogs with just putting the cardiotomy suction back into the circulation. The other half, he processed it in a cell saver. And then, you know, at the end of the day, he dissected the brains of the dogs. And what he found were these tiny little microvascular dilatations. It kind of looked like a snake swallowing an egg. And the significance was pretty amazing. The dogs that got the cardiotomy suction had all kinds of lipid emboli lodged in their brains. Now, emboli is not good. I don't care if it's 100% CO2, 100% oxygen. The microvasculature is 1 cell thick. And on the inside of that, you've got the glycocalyx, which is kind of like the slime on the fish skin. And any emboli will denude that glycocalyx. So now all of a sudden, you've created an opportunity for edema to occur, swelling, and some of the things we've been talking about this morning. So, you know, if you're not being careful about the things you can't see, you know, there's things that we're missing. Okay, here's a slightly newer paper from Gable. He kind of gave us a cutoff point, and this was pretty amazing. When you compare the patient's blood volume and you add up to about 5% cardiotomy suction, you really don't affect the hemostasis that much. But once you go beyond that point, Then you start affecting fibrinogen levels, platelet function, and we're only talking, 300 to 400 cc's of cardiotomy suction here. So, it's not a significant amount of volume that actually starts affecting your platelet function and hemostasis at the end of the case. And once again, avoiding transfusing the cardiotomy suction without processing it first, you're taking risks. You don't know if it's going to happen. You don't know when it's going to happen. Once emboli is in the bloodstream, you don't control it. It comes out of the aortic cannula. Some goes upstream, some downstream. And it's kind of like rolling the dice. I skip that every darn time. Okay. Later that year, he also released a paper looking at cytokines. Now, what are cytokines? The smart guys know them all by their interleukin numbers, but they're little proteins that are chemotactic messengers within blood. Some are inflammatory, some are anti-inflammatory. And what he did with this study is he looked at the cardiotomy suction, and he found out that the inflammatory cytokines are 6 times higher in the cardiotomy suction than they are in the circulating blood volume. And the bad thing is that the good guys, the anti-inflammatory cytokines, are not elevated at all. So now all of a sudden there's this huge imbalance between the good guys and the bad guys. And what he found or decided with his study, washing the blood washed out all the cytokines to a very high degree, and then postoperatively adding that processed volume back into the circulating blood volume, reduced circulating cytokine levels to normal postoperatively. And here's another one. In 2016, this was just last year. Pretty good sized study, almost 200 patients, split half and half. And I guess the null hypothesis, this is a prospective randomized study, is that cytokines do not affect vent times. Well, after processing half of the blood on half the patients and returning it to the others, they did come up with a little bit of significance, 2 hours shorter on the processed patients as far as vent time goes. But what they also figured out is that it's very significantly positive for allogeneic blood exposure and the hemoglobin levels within that first or after that first hour of being on bypass. So while we're in the OR, we're all doing a great thing, but it's like once everybody leaves our care and they're in the unit, things continue to bleed. Units are being dropped into the patient because they're watching the blood going down. It's rising in the auto transfusion devices, and so you got to wonder: are we really doing a good thing by putting the cardiotomy suction back in? For years people have been looking at that. I've had this conversation many times, and there's always the argument: there's too much protein, there's platelets in there. You're just throwing that all away when you put it into a cell saver. And the argument really to be made is that cardiotomy suction garbage, or is it really valuable? The good stuff is the red cells. Everything else is pretty much garbage. I mean, what we're doing is we're taking the garbage and throwing it right back onto our plate and eating it again. It's not the greatest idea if you look at it from this point of view. This is a chart that looks at IL-6. Interleukin-6 is one of the bad guys. And this is first hour postoperatively. And you can see how it spikes pretty high over the processed patients. And then they both kind of level out just a little bit before the end of the hour. And these two charts look at tissue markers that show tissue damage. And they pretty much emulate the interleukin-6 levels rise and fall. And these are markers that they use for identifying lung damage. Okay, I'm going to change gears a little bit. And perfusionists have a tendency to take whatever they've got and use it modify the technique that that they're doing on a day-to-day basis and adapting the tools to how it fits their program. Everybody runs things a little different. You know, you look at perf list and you see the surgeons complaining that, or perfusionists complaining about surgeons wanting to run pump suckers before the ACTs are adequate, or they want the pump suckers going while the protamine's going. Chris Trocchio in Georgia, he deals with this by simply closing off the cardiotomy suction, waiting for the ACT to become adequate. As long as it's adequate, by the time he needs to go on bypass, he's fine. If he doesn't, there's a port right here on the lid where you can hang an external cardiotomy. He moves his lines and he's preserved the whole circuit. And the same thing goes in reverse. Chris doesn't seem to have the protamine issue, but for people that do have those protamine issues where the surgeon wants the pump sucker still running, you close the valve once the protamine goes on and starts going in, and if need be, you hang an external cardiotomy. Tony Shackelford over at MUSC, he's just got a thing about keeping his wrap volume nice and clean. So you can see, like with a single chamber, once the suckers are going during cannulation, all your prime gets a little pink. Well, what Tony does is he likes to keep the valve closed. Instead, over in the dual, he can keep all that cardiotomy suction separated while he's doing his wrap. These are some photos. He's kind of proud. You know, it doesn't take much blood to turn a bag red. I can tell you from experience on that one. I'd push it dark red and then barely have a thin line of cells laying at the bottom of the bag at the end of the case. But you know, this is pretty much his technique. He wraps the arterial side, pushes it over into the cardiotomy section. Then he does the antegrade portion of it. Then he takes the venous blood and chases it through the rest of the oxygenator. Once he starts going on bypass, he determines whether he's wrapped a little too heavy. If he needs to, he can add some of that volume back. If not, he goes ahead and just sucks it right over to the cell saver. Another one of his perfusionists over there noticed that the table at the end of the case would say, hey, do you need any volume while they're coming off bypass? And so while they're trying to shift volume to the patient, somebody'd stick the chest, something in the pleural space and start sucking out all that volume. And while you're trying to maintain blood pressure, they're dumping all the garbage right back into your circuit, and ultimately that kills your blood pressure. And so they just close the valve, sequester that volume, and then once they're off bypass, they run it over to a cell saver and process it. Thank you.
I think we all want to buy that reservoir. I mean, I
Well,
want
it's
it.
up to the oxygenator, and I have the whole thing at my booth. If you'd like to come by, we have a 6-liter, 8-liter, and we lowered the prime in that because also exposure to, you know, to try to lower the exposure to the material.
Which one of your booths?
My one
The
inside.
one in our, okay, good. That's what makes
And
sure.
we also have an integral filter. So it's really a neat product, and it's all designed with the reservoir and the oxygenator. So if you get a chance, you're interested, stop by. I'd love to talk to you about
Nice
it.
job.
Oh, yeah. Okay,
See it.
Oh, yeah.
Any questions for Bo?
You know, we talk to surgeons and train them, but there's still a fair amount. If I sequestered all of it on one side, I'd probably be giving blood more often.
Yeah.
Then there's the risk of giving blood because you've taken half your blood volume and stuff over there. What's the answer to that?
Have you ever tried it? Have you ever tried just sending everything to the cell saver?
Well, we tried not using any, cardiotomy suction whatsoever. It's like problematic. Surgeons get pissed for, bark at them and they.
Okay, I'm going to go back to when I was clinical, and one of my partners and I, we were the only ones that really played with this. But what we would do is we would put a Y in the sucker line. You got about 4 inches there going into the cardiotomy, then another line going over to the cell saver. And there was always the argument that on valves there's just too much suction. Well, I'm not going to pull vent blood, and I'm or a sump. And I always let that go over into the reservoir. But anything that they would send over through suckers, I just ran to the cell saver. And I can tell you that there were, on a normal coronary, it's easy to identify it. I mean, they'll use the sucker when they're cannulating. Boom, just put that all right back in, because it doesn't have time to lay in the chest and accumulate all the garbage that
Evil
develops.
humors.
Evil humors. I was, ballsy or stupid enough to just try on different cases to run everything over into the cell saver. And I can tell you that every time I did it, and generally you wash maybe one bowl with all the stuff that comes over. There were cases where I would process 3 bowls, and those patients dried up just as good as if, we just hung a bag of platelets. It's pretty impressive. Now, that's kind of just empirical. I'm telling you that I never did a study, but and I was always pretty nervous, because when you make decisions to do that kind of stuff on pump, everybody's pointing the finger at you. And, I held my breath a few times, but after reading the literature, I was confident enough I was doing the right thing. And, all I'm doing is kind of keeping an eye on the table, and I'd move a clamp back and forth. And if there was a bunch of blood, like they ripped into something, okay, boom, I move the clamp back over, shut off the cell saver, and bring it all back into the pump. But, just normal sucking around the chest and stuff during a case, I never even moved it. It all went into the cell saver. And, you can process in the middle of the case and drop the red cells back. That's the key part. But what you're getting rid of is all the inflammatory products. And the proteins, I will tell you, I always start out with extra albumin in the beginning of the case anyway. That was just my kind of thing. I pretty aggressive with albumin and mannitol, period. And, it makes patients pee, and it keeps volume in the circuit while you need it. I got yelled at for getting too aggressive with Lasix, but I didn't mind that.
Lasix is nephrotoxic. You have to remember that. I think good perfusion.
I was getting yelled at because the nurses were chasing it in the unit.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's different reasons, exactly.
Okay.
It's interesting, and I've run several cases with this, but in surgery, if you run it and put your suction blood in there, you obviously don't notice a lot, but if you run one of these and all of a sudden you lift it and let the suction blood go in, you'll see a patient's pressure drop by 50%. So you see what kind of, how the patient actually reacts to that.
We've all seen that. We've all seen it. Right? Somebody up there?
It's unbelievable, though. I wouldn't have believed it if I hadn't seen it.
We see it all the time, but we all know. We've seen it for years. I mean, I think this is a great idea.
This is probably some of the things that started surgeons thinking about what's going on. I mean,
yeah, I said it tongue in cheek, but I was serious. That's a good reservoir. You had a question?
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm an Inspire user, and we do exactly what you do. Our circuit is wide off. We almost exclusively send everything to the cell saver. We've been doing that for years.
Yeah.
Without any problems. We do process like 2 to 4 bowls, but it's never been a problem. My question is that why, doing what I do, what's the advantage of using this new reservoir? Where's my reason to call Terry?
Quite honestly, you're already doing
this new reservoir.
You're already doing what the reservoir is designed to do. Make it easy. The reservoir is designed to make it easy. That's really it?
Because you're still going to have a line from your reservoir to we've got a line that goes across. So I mean, that's.
But I think that your situation is that your whole team has embraced it.
Correct.
For those of us who may be in a circumstance where the team doesn't necessarily embrace it, this is a way for you to make a clinical judgment about how you're going to manage that particular case. And I think that is still, unfortunately, but it's true, at least in my experience, more often than not, that you're not going to convince somebody to change the way they practice. Jim and I used to work together. And you remember how many times you and I both, would be on pump and they would do exactly that. Oh, look, we got some extra volume in the chest. No, don't give that to us. Don't give it to us. We don't want it. We don't want that. Every time they sucked it in, we'd see the pressure drop, and we were sitting there, now we're on pump longer, all we want to do is get off. Okay, out by noon with no balloon, we want to go home. Okay, we want something else to do. But regardless, they would still do it. This gives us the option of not having to have that argument, suck it up, shunt it over if we don't want it, and be done with it. And it solves the problem. I see it as a pretty good tool.
You know, normally, most of us have an extra roller head that's not being used.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got the venous return blood and the cardiotomy blood separated, can't you ultrafiltrate the cardiotomy blood, run it through the roller head, through the hemoconcentrator, and dump it back into the venous return?
That would only make it worse, because now you're just hyperconcentrated. All you're doing is removing the plasma water. You're not removing the plasma that has all those evil humor proteins that are floating around now. So it would just exacerbate.
They wouldn't be sucked out?
No, you wouldn't be able to do it on a single pass like that. I think like something like the hemo bag or whatever, I think that they have some utility in that, but it's, I think, very limited. If you're gonna do aggressive zero balance ultrafiltration, CVVH, through the entire procedure, and be removing and replacing in order to control those pro-inflammatory mediators, then I think it would have some utility. It's not a bad idea, but I don't think it would work. What do you think?
I don't know. That's kind of like the goal of MUF. So I don't know. In my mind, that's something that you'd have to evaluate. Setting, looking at the effluent that's coming off, and then looking at the blood that's going back in. You'd almost need to look at it.
Yeah.
I've never seen a report or anything about the effluent was taken off hemoconcentrate. What's actually in that bag?
Well, that's been done. You can actually look those studies up. They actually have a lot of data on that. And you remove both pro-inflammatory mediators and anti-inflammatory mediators. So you remove both. To take out the bad, you got to take out the good when you do that. The argument is that when you have a patient that has a disproportionate high level of pro-inflammatory mediators compared to anti-inflammatory mediators, which are usually depressed, and you start removing it en bloc, you're therefore disproportionately removing the evil stuff. And as you do that, the body has an opportunity to reset itself, get those pro-inflammatory mediators out, produce more anti-inflammatory mediators, and get more of a homeostatic basis. So that's the theoretical concept behind it. So those studies have been done, and they've measured the bad interleukins in that waste product. Well, you could do that too, but they're slow, a lot of resistance, it'd be difficult to run all of your blood through that.
Expensive too.
Yeah, very expensive, yeah. Paul charges a lot for those.
Yeah.
Right.
And they're
Yeah, I think what you're doing is awesome, but what this reservoir does allow you is when you send that volume like Bo did during his practice to the cell saver, you can't get it back. And if you isolate it in the back of this reservoir, evaluate that volume, because you can actually look at it, evaluate it, and then if you need it, you can take it. If you don't, then you can send it. It gives you more options.
And I think that's a great point, because I think what Bo said, which I really focused on, kind of got my attention, was I was a little bit nervous, but I was a little bit ballsy, and I thought that I would do it. I think it was a quote, in fact. We got it on tape. And the reality of it is, in our business, for what we do for a living, we are only as good as our last right decision.
Yeah.
So they might come to you and say, man, what have you been doing? The patients are drier, what are you doing differently? And you tell them, and oh, you're a hero. But the one day he forgets, and there's way too much blood there, and I'm even give a unit, and there's a cluster because of it. That was a bad move, Bo. Going on a PIP. Okay.
Yeah. Well,
So
I want to see that again. Yeah.
if he might have the job tomorrow, I mean, that's the harsh reality of our jobs. Our jobs are very, one mess up, and it could be career ending. So, compliments to you for being that brave. But I think the reservoir looks like.
But I mean, you could get
You
to
gotta-
a decision of, do I give this bad blood or do I give pack cells? Because I don't have volume to come off.
The red cells, you can process and add back. I mean, the literature is pretty clear about the processed blood. Dumping it back into circulation is fine. but, and, that, prevents giving the allogeneic blood. But I think that.
Well, the red cells at least.
Yeah.
Now, if you put too much over there, you will deplete all of your clotting factor proteins. I mean, that's gonna happen.
Yes.
We can overwhelm it. If it's 10 liters, I mean, you've got a problem.
Right.
Right.
But, I'm not talking about washing, the whole circuit and then adding it back. I mean, I don't think that, you gotta make decisions.
Yeah,
At some
exactly.
point in the game, you just say, okay,
Yeah.
I've done this enough, no more for the rest of the case.
Yeah, and live with what you got.
Right.
Mark?
Yeah, because that is a balance, and he was just mentioning that earlier. If you're working in a case or with a surgeon and something's left open and you're just accumulating a lot of volume in the chest, and you keep having to give crystalloid, and then you start with a low crit, you get to the point, well, do you have to give pack cells versus, there is a balance. The sucker blood versus pack cells versus sending everything to the cell saver, and if you have a lot of blood, which all these situations are that we're talking about that cause problems, the cell saver blood, like we mentioned, will then wash out all your clotting factors, and then at the end you're having to give maybe platelets and FFP and things like that. So there really is, patient specific.
And sometimes you get sloppy surgeons. Listen, I've
Right.
worked with surgeons who spend a lot of time making sure they have good hemostasis, especially on the bone, before they go giving the heparin and they go on bypass. I've been with some that don't want to do it at all, and it just drips and drips and
Right.
drips and drips all day long. And there's two liters in the chest. I've seen it happen many times, and it's just I'd say let's just look for another job. We'll work with that surgeon. That's what I would do.
I got one quick question.
Yeah.
Again, VABD, does that do anything different? Does that
Oh, yeah, that's
do
a good
things that
question.
do anything
No,
to the
there's a communication. The wall doesn't go all the way to the top, so the pressure is equal on both sides. As a matter of fact, if you had too much volume on either side, it would spill over. So, it's
That's kind of cool.
yeah,
Okay, so it's all one reservoir, really, it's just partition.
It's
They're not
partition.
sealed at all.
yeah, maybe an inch there, just below the lid is where you have a gap.
Man, that's bad. But have we done those cases where we go on bypass? Especially those like old-time, long-standing mitral valves, or somebody that they fluid resuscitate. You go on pump and you see that reservoir going up. I know, it'll stop in just a second. Come on. Plant the line.
Go ahead.
Can you cover what happens if you go on to sucker bypass and all your sucker blood's going into the partition part?
Yeah,
What's
the
flow?
cardiotomy is rated at 4 liters. And, as long as you're within those parameters, keep the gate open and just run it.
Yeah. We won't run TCD on those cases.
I'd be interested in anybody with experience with the Inspire, with the PCO2 on valves, and the surgeon is flowing the CO2 around. I run a CDI 500, and of course it spikes the PCO2.
Yeah.
Have to turn my minute ventilation up. How does it handle? Does it let it bleed across into the suckers? Because the suckers pulls it in.
Yeah.
That's where I get it from.
Sucker controls is anytime you've got CO2 going into the chest and you're trying to monitor your CO2, sucker management is key to the whole.
Does that partition stop it?
No.
Okay. So I still need to send it to.
Yeah.
Because it's open at the top.
It's open at the top, so
For pressure
that layer of CO2 that you're
Okay.
pumping in is going equally into both chambers.
All right, Bo, thank you very much. He'll be available for more questions.